Welcome everyone to Vanguard Court Watch Presents. My name is Josh Kaizuka. I'm an attorney and sometimes a grassroots rabble-rouser, or some say a troublemaker, organizing and helping with protest actions in the Sacramento area. I want to thank you all for joining us today for COVID-19, jails, and why we need criminal justice reform. Before we dive into the program, I want to introduce David Greenwald, a graduate of UC Davis with a degree in political science, the founder and publisher of Vanguard, which started in 2006, and of course the Vanguard Court Watch, which started in 2010. I think I've known David for ever since the Vanguard started. Is that right, David?
Pretty much. Welcome everybody. My name is David Greenwald. I'm gonna briefly go through what we've been doing with the Vanguard and the Vanguard Court Watch for those who are not that familiar. The founding event is really interesting for the Vanguard itself, but I'm not going to go into that in great detail. But in 2006, we started the Vanguard, and then 4 years later, and actually it starts in 2009, I get a call from some folks whose loved one had been convicted of a crime, and they believed he was innocent. And so I go and I meet with them and talk with them. And, you know, at this point in 2009, I really didn't know anything about wrongful conviction. And so I went in really kind of skeptical about it. But they did convince me to go, and I'm just blown away that somebody could end up with that kind of sentence. So I sat down with a friend of mine who was going to law school, and I said, hey, we need to get into these cases before they come out with sentencing, because it's almost impossible, especially if you don't have a lot of resources, to go back over a case after it's already been decided. And we came up with the idea of putting interns in the courtroom. And the big problem that we've figured out is that the media really does not have the resources to cover the courts the way it should. Back in the old days, reporters used to be able to go into the courts, they would cover all the cases, and sometimes there'd be more than one reporter because newsrooms had lots of reporters. These days, you're lucky if you have one reporter covering multiple counties and multiple courthouses. And so the result is that outside of a few very high-profile cases, the typical court case gets zero coverage in most locations. And even when it is covered, it's not very critical. And they tend to be these high-profile cases which are sensational. So, you know, you get the father that slashes and kills his 3 kids. But it turns out that a lot of times the most problematic cases are much less well known. And so nobody really knows what's happening in the courts, and other than these high profile cases. And so what we did was devise a way on a low budget to gain access to the court system. And by putting in interns, they monitor the court cases. And what we do, which is very different from most court watches, instead of just punching stuff out on Twitter or doing quick videos, we actually teach the interns to write journalistically, and then they report on our website. So we've learned a lot just watching trials over the years. We've seen trials, we've seen hearings, we've seen cases. I've read about numerous wrongful convictions. We see overcharging in the court system all the time. And all of this needs to be monitored and reported. And so what we're doing is really ground up work where we're looking at criminal justice reform at the level of the court, at the level of the trial, at the level of the preliminary hearing, and sometimes even the arraignment. In the last few years, we've been expanding what we've done because we realized that this isn't just a problem in my little county next to Sacramento. This is a problem statewide, nationwide. And so, a couple years ago, we expanded our coverage into Sacramento, and we've been heavily covering the courts there. And then last year, my dear friend Jeff Adachi, the public defender in San Francisco, one of the only elected public defenders in the entire country, and the only one in the state, he passed away. And following that, we ended up partnering with the San Francisco Public Defender's Office to monitor and report on cases there. So, so this has been a really interesting time, and they're shouting that my time is up. So I'm going to say something really quickly, and then I'll turn it over. It's been an interesting time because the courts have been shut down, and now they're kind of quasi-reopened, and we're able to cover all over the state and even the country from where we are. Because everything has become digital, everything has become remote, and we're really built to take advantage. And so one of our big goals is to expand, and we're looking, actually, we have a plan to expand to 10 jurisdictions. We're going to start with our next one, which is Los Angeles. Hopefully I'll get a chance to talk more about that at another point. Let me turn it back over to Josh.
Okay, thank you, David. Like David said, the Vanguard really does report on cases and issues that mainstream press does not report on. And currently it's in Yolo County, Sacramento, the San Francisco area. And in San Francisco, Vanguard just started last year in that city and places around there. Like David said, Vanguard is looking at expanding into Los Angeles. And as a nonprofit, it's people like you who can make it happen. Please get a paid subscription or donate so that Vanguard can continue on its mission to expand. So turning back to the program, this is a discussion of COVID-19, its impact on our jails, and the fact that this is alerting many in the reform movement that we need to move forward on decarceration. As of now, there are more than 3,200 people in prison just in California who have contracted COVID-19. And as far as the latest reporting, 16 inmates have passed away. They've died. The basic protocols to prevent the spread of COVID-19 are being ignored. And there are 6 prisons and jails in California where the outbreaks are escalating. That a prison or jail environment is not conducive to social distancing is an understatement. Trying to do what we do on the outside, like making masks, keeping things clean, social distancing, they can't do that. And when people who are incarcerated try to do the same type of things, they get written up, or they get some sort of violation, or they get retaliated against. Even in places or facilities where inmates can get masks, and some of them are getting those, they can't get them cleaned. How do you social distance in a cell where you have a bunkmate 6 feet away from you? Anyways, let me introduce you to our distinguished panel. First, Janos Marton, who was born to immigrant parents from Hungary and India, and as a young man of color growing up in the 1990s in New York, experienced firsthand how the tough on crime tactics eroded the community's trust in law enforcement. He's built a career as an advocate fighting powerful interests, led the Close Riker campaign, joined the ACLU to fight for changes in the criminal justice policies, including bail and sentencing across the country. He's now running for district attorney in Manhattan. Welcome, Janos. Next, we have Yolanda Huang, who is a San Francisco Bay Area civil rights attorney. Yolanda immigrated to the United States in the late 50s and was raised and educated here in the United States before Title IX, before the Civil Rights Act, before English as a second language education, and before the existence of the Equal Protection Administration. She is a graduate of Berkeley School of Law and has been practicing in the Bay Area for over 35 years. Interestingly, following the Occupy movement, she began focusing on Bay Area jail conditions. Welcome, Yolanda. John Stoller is an assistant public defender in Sacramento County within the research unit. In that role, he represents people in appellate and post-conviction litigation while also handling novel or nuanced motions at the trial. He's responsible for administering the office's educational programming, providing advice and research to other attorneys, and overseeing various criminal justice projects, including SB 1437 Felony Murder Resentencing Project. He's active in the community and a member of several community organizations. Unfortunately, Michelle Spalding couldn't be with us tonight. And our last panelist is Jaku Wilson. He's a longtime public defender in San Francisco. He's run the Public Defender Court Watch program where youths are watching court proceedings and they discuss the criminal justice system issues. He supervises the bail clinic between the Public Defender's Office and the University of San Francisco School of Law. And through a nonprofit organization with his twin brother, advocates for kids in Modesto where they grew up to eliminate disparities in education and to end school to prison pipelines in their hometown. So turning to Janos. Janos, my understanding is that you are involved with the Close Rikers movement and the impact of COVID on Rikers Island. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So first of all, I really appreciate being here and getting to share the evening with so many Californians. As you noted in your introduction, I get to work on criminal justice issues all over the country, and California is often the cutting edge of what we're doing to reform our system and end mass incarceration. Very often when I'm speaking to a legislator and referring to what other states have implemented what we're proposing, they'll say, what states have done it besides California? So we definitely respect all the work that you all are doing to make California a better place, and we know how much farther we have to go to make the system fair even in California. So I'll just start with that and say that the Vanguard's a great cause, and I'm very happy to be here to support it. So my background is I'm originally an organizer before I went to law school. I became a civil rights attorney. I worked both in government fighting corruption and in private practice litigating before I joined Just Leadership USA, which is a national organization founded by formerly incarcerated people to tackle this issue of Rikers Island. Now, for those who don't know, Rikers Island is, we consider it the most notorious jail in the country. I don't know if you do in California, but it's certainly the most notorious jail in New York. It's been around for 80 years, an island off the coast of LaGuardia Airport, which has been just a horror show since the day it opened. Violence, corruption, just terrible, grisly conditions. And generation after generation of New Yorkers has tried to reform Rikers, and there have been blue ribbon commissions, and nothing's come of it. And so finally, beginning of 2016, Glenn Martin, somebody who's formerly incarcerated and spent time there twice, announced that he was going to launch a campaign to close it. And I joined up with him and became the manager for that campaign. Over the course of 2 years, we organized, we marched, we rallied, we were up in our state capitol, we were doing digital work, anything we could do to shift the narrative around what Rikers is and how it was morally incongruous with our values as New Yorkers. By the end of the 2 years, at the end of 2017, we succeeded in getting the mayor, governor, and city council to agree that Rikers Island needed to close, and we needed to create a much smaller jail system in New York that locks up far fewer people. So that was all really great. We were basically at this point arguing over how fast to close it and what replaces it and what programs people can have instead of being locked up when COVID-19 hit. So Rikers is still open today, even though we won the campaign to close Rikers. And so from the very beginning, as soon as we learned what COVID was, we wanted to move very quickly to get as many people out of there as possible. We understood, as our moderator said, that there's no way that you could practice healthy best practices or social distancing inside of a jail, especially, a notoriously crowded jail with narrow hallways and as many as 50 men to a room. So we've been organizing to get individuals who are vulnerable to coronavirus out first. That's elderly people, people with underlying health conditions. We've concurrently been fighting to get people in broad categories of their case dispositions out. For example, I think many people on this call would probably agree that those who are accused of only technical parole violations shouldn't be in jail in the first place. So we've been trying to get those folks out. And we've had mixed success. We've gotten almost 1,000 people out of Rikers, and there are now fewer than 5,000 people on Rikers Island compared to, for example, 6,000 before COVID-19 and 10,000 when we started the Closed Rikers campaign. Unfortunately, that's not good enough. We also have a great problem of elderly people in our state prison system we're having great difficulty getting pardons and clemency for them. But those are all active efforts that are underway in New York. We're trying to get people out of Rikers. We're trying to get people out of upstate prisons, and we're trying to continue passing progressive legislation that will result in far fewer people being in jail or in prison in the first place.
Well, thank you, Janos. Just for the people attending today's panel discussion, if you have questions, feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, if you put your cursor towards the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat icon, and if you click on it, the chat box will open up on the left or the right side. Anyways, moving on to Yolanda. Yolanda, I understand you filed some lawsuits in federal court to force the jails in Alameda to protect incarcerated individuals from COVID-19. Can you tell us what's going on at the Santa Rita and Oakland jails?
Well, what my focus is on the experience, the life that the people who are incarcerated live. And jails are actually this strange institution because on one hand, they're theoretically supposed to be short-term, so they don't have to be very comfortable. They don't have to give you places to exercise. They can just be a box to hold you because you're going to be moving out pretty quickly. That's the concept, but I don't think that that's ever been true. So you end up having people who are pretrial, technically innocent, 14th Amendment, right? Cannot punish these people, living in basically conditions that are worse than you would get at San Quentin. So that started being brought to my attention by this jailhouse lawyer who decided that I was going to be the one to challenge this. And he would call me regularly, for a year and send me things and send me briefs and all of these things. And so he sort of reeled me in doing this. And what you realize is that sheriffs, at least in California, are fiefdom unto themselves. They have complete control. Most county supervisors sign the check and approve the budget, but that's it. Even though technically they're supposed to review it. Alameda, the jail there is supposed to be a giant jail. It was finished in '89 at the start of the whole 3 strikes thing that swept through California. So it was designed as a maximum security design to hold people. There's no rooms for classes. There's no real gyms. The women never get to go outside. The gym is a concrete courtyard with a net over the top of it. So it's very stressful being in that kind of environment. And their whole thing is these people are criminals. Forget that they're pretrial. They're violent. They're criminals. They're going away. And it's our job to provide them with the minimum it takes to keep them alive. That's it. So for example, I've heard many stories of people who break a bone while they're in custody. A lot of times they won't even splint it, especially if it's a bone in your hand or your foot. They don't even splint it. And 8 weeks, 10 weeks, if the person's not seriously debilitated, somehow it'll knit a little bit, or maybe they'll just bandage it. It'll knit, but it won't be straight. It won't fit well, and they don't care. So it's these types of conditions that exist for people who have tested positive in Santa Rita jail. Right now, if you are tested positive, you get yanked out and you get put into the solitary confinement cell. And then you're given 1 hour a day of outside time where you have to use the phone, you have to take a shower and be able to walk around a little bit. That's it. You get 1 hour a day out. You are completely isolated. The way they do treatment there, medical treatment, is the door is a big heavy metal door, and there's a little slot in the door for the food tray, because it's solitary confinement. They can pass the food to you and you are isolated from human contact. So to get the medical treatment consists of the prisoner getting on his knees and sticking his forehead through the tray slot and having the nurse on the outside put a forehead thermometer on there. That's the medical treatment. When you go there, we know that one of the common symptoms is shivering. People are cold, or they're running a fever, their temperatures are off. And it's against the prison rules, the jail rules, to have anyone have more than one blanket. So you could be sitting there sick in a concrete cell, and all you have is one blanket, and you can be cold, and you can be with a very deadly disease, and you don't get an extra blanket. It takes a lawyer calling in and complaining to get a sick COVID-19 infected prisoner an extra blanket. We've all heard about the hacking cough, the difficulty breathing, right? When you have a hacking cough at home, I think about, what do I want? I want to be warm. I want to be comfortable. I want to have a hot beverage, whether it's tea or soup, something that's soothing. Well, if you're a prisoner in Santa Rita jail, even if you're pretrial, the only thing you get to drink is the tap water from your spigot in your cell. And that's it. Drink the water. If you have someone who's going to advocate for you, they'll give you 2 cough drops, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. That's it. That's the medical care that those patients are getting. So I think that this is a huge need, that human beings are treated like human beings. And I think that that is an essential requirement of every institution we have in this country. And I am very happy that the decarceration effort has been as successful. I think they've dropped down, 600-700 prisoners. So they went from 2,500, they're down to 1,700, 1,800. It fluctuates a little bit because there's constantly new arrests. But I think that the public defenders have always pushed real hard to get compassionate release. And the effort is great. I think it's what needs to happen. And I totally understand wanting to close an institution, because reforming it or improving it is almost impossible. So if you can't reform it because they resist and block you, then the only choice you have ultimately is to close it. If it can't be better, then it's not worth having. So I'm happy if anybody has questions. Oh, my minute is up. My time.
Well, you had more than a minute, but anyways, it's okay. That was fascinating, and really appreciate your description of how horrible conditions are over at Santa Rita. We'll have the questions after all the speakers are done. And okay. Then, I've got some questions for you too. But anyways, let's hang on to that. And John is a public defender in Sacramento County. And, I run into him fairly often when I'm kind of doing my shtick, which is, being a criminal defense attorney in Sacramento. Now, John, you know about the conditions over at the Sacramento County Jail, right? I understand that your office may have filed some sort of action or a lawsuit. Can you tell us what's going on in Sacramento?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having us on. I see Pamela Price is on the line too. I just want to say hi, an amazing activist and attorney. Hi, Ms. Price. If I could share my screen here, I can give you an overview of what the Sacramento Public Defender has done. So we try to mobilize as quickly as we could. Our administration, our leadership, and our research unit really try to get on top of the ball right away, even before the shelter-in-place orders. The day after the March 19th order, we began filing a series of 14 motions. We filed 7 writs of habeas corpus for consolidated inmates and 7 OR or release motions for persons as well. We grouped these were on behalf of 1,674 people, and we grouped them into 7 groups. Each person got a habeas, and each person got the OR or statutory motion. We supported it with our contacts in the community. One of our leadership, Tiffany Sinnott, did an amazing job reaching out to the community, collecting resources where we established just the public policy reasons behind decarceration, and just also the severe health crisis that COVID-19 presents. And Ms. Sinnott reached out to numerous different doctors to create, the substance to support these pleadings. Those pleadings got the ball rolling on some initial orders from the court through stipulation by the district attorney. We had already had our courts order the early release of several misdemeanors. They released about 46 misdemeanors immediately, changed the rules on how to cite and release. And then through our work, we got 479 people released as what I like to think a direct result of the motion work. And also just great deal of work from our administration, Norm Dawson and Amanda Benson, reaching out to the opposition to get stipulations to release people. So that's what we are doing mid-March. Got a bunch of people released, but the court didn't give us a hearing on the OR motion. They didn't actually set it for a hearing for us to present evidence. And in the meantime, we had another team collecting a bunch of different type of evidence from epidemiologists and people that work in the jail medical units to demonstrate the severe health conditions inside. So we took the OR motions and, as a consolidated writ of mandate, filed that in the 3rd District Court of Appeal. And by the way, we have no idea if these are real things, to just consolidate a writ on behalf of over 1,000 people, but we did it, and the courts listened. The court initially asked for an informal response. That was in April. We had a small round of informal briefing, and then the Superior Court assigned us out on the habeas matters to a judge in Superior Court. Seeing that the 3rd District Court of Appeal called our issue moot and fluid and various things, that denied writ, and now we're perfecting the habeas back in front of that judge. Meanwhile, California was fortunate enough to have the Judicial Council institute the emergency mandatory bail schedule, which saw the release of a lot of inmates, but unfortunately not without opposition. Our district attorney opposed the release on behalf of 103 individuals that the Judicial Council demanded to have 0 bail, and we litigated that. We won most of those. We lost a few, and then litigated that up to the 3rd District Court of Appeal, who recently denied writs on those issues as well. Again, this was all supported with letters on behalf of local community groups, clergy members, and experts to justify our claims about the jail conditions. So, and we try to touch a smattering of cases. We are now the emergency mandatory bail schedule kind of took our efforts towards directing the Superior Court to make the bail schedule mandatory. We filed those writs, and now we're considering taking that writ to the Supremes. And now, all in all, what we have done is we've taken the Sacramento County jail system, which previously, before COVID, had about 3,700 occupants at any given time, to now a population of 2,400. Still a lot of work to do given how the Sacramento County jail system is set up. So that's the background on what we've done. Just so you guys know about our jail system, we have 2 main locations. We have the main jail, which looks like your classic jail. It has cells. It has 1,250 cells. Then we have the branch location called the Rio Casunas Correctional Center. This uses a mix of cell-style housing as well as barrack-style housing. Our office, in part of this mobilization effort, has also interviewed about 100 inmates as of today to determine their confinement conditions. In interviewing them, what we have found is that the jails are trying to provide soap and cleaning supplies, but there's not enough to go around. They're not being given sufficient towels and wipes and things like that. Jail regulations forbid the use of masks and hand sanitizer. But most importantly, as Yolanda was saying, people cannot adequately socially distance, especially in the barrack-style housing. In the barracks housing, they sleep within arm's reach of each other. In the main jail, people are still double-celled. So what I was working on up until this call started was a new habeas that would kickstart the old habeas on behalf of all people in jail, with kind of this hearing framework that every person can just revive and incorporate the prior habeas by just submitting a declaration on behalf of the new inmate. We're going to see how that works, and we're very hopeful.
Well, thank you, John. Next, we've got Jaku Wilson. I understand, Jaku, that you've got two brothers who are incarcerated. There's a lawsuit filed because of concerns about COVID-19. In fact, one of your brothers, Lance, tested positive for COVID-19. And I think also your other brother, who's incarcerated at Terminal Island, is part of a class action, right?
Yeah. And thank you, Josh, and thank you, David, as well. The work you do with the Davis Vanguard is truly amazing, and it's an honor to be a part of that program and work with you and the interns and everyone else. And I see some faces on this here and recognize some names, so thank you all for being there. And the names I don't recognize, thank you, because this means that you really are concerned about what is going on in these jails and these prisons. And thanks to the panelists as well for all the work that they are doing. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. No need to paint a pretty picture when there ain't a pretty picture. Currently I have a younger brother who's at Terminal Island. There are more folks at Terminal Island with COVID than any of the state prisons combined. Terminal Island is a federal prison. Additionally, I have a brother who is in Arizona, and he's in Navajo County jail. It is our position that both of them essentially are being illegally held. With regard to Lance, who is at Terminal Island, he is in there for a drug offense. He received 96 months when he should not have received 96 months. He got an additional 48 months because when he was allowed to go to a drug treatment program, which he did not complete because he allegedly had an invisible cell phone that they never found, the judge gave him an additional 48 months. Had he not been given that additional 48 months, under the old Compassionate Release Act, Lance would be eligible for release right now because he would have served over half of his sentence. Lance was, the probation report recommended 48 months. Because he is there, and because Terminal Island is overpopulated, because of the communal living, and because it houses individuals who are medically vulnerable or have mental health issues, he is in a class of his own. He has asthma and he has hypertension. I spoke to him today for the first time in 2 days. He, at least, I got to hear his voice. That's what I will say briefly. With regard to Nico, Nico was released in 2018 from Fresno County Jail. We worked hard with Senator Nancy Skinner to help reform the felony murder rule in California. Nico was released. The state of California released him. Arizona was supposed to put a detainer in place and a bench warrant via the interstate compact. They failed to do so. Nico was out for 8 months. They then put this warrant out there. They then take him into custody. We've appealed that decision all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court. And in the meantime, we brought 4 different bail motions, and the judge in Arizona has denied each of those, claiming that he has no jurisdiction because we've appealed it to the Arizona Supreme Court. And we've appealed that decision today. In each one of these jails or prisons, they're acting like COVID doesn't exist. I talked to Lance today, and where Lance is housed, everybody is just lumped in there together. Whether you have a cold, whether you have chills, whether you have a fever, whether you're coughing, everyone who is sick is just put together at their own vices. Lance has not received a new face mask since last month. The last time they took his temperature was May 8th. He hasn't seen a doctor at all, nor a nurse, nor does he have any upcoming doctor's appointment to see anyone in medical. With regard to where Nico is, that's in the heart of Navajo Nation in Arizona. I talked to him yesterday. Before COVID, the way that it was is that two people were in a cell with bunkies within 2 feet reach of one another. You could reach out and text somebody. And then a third person sleeps on the floor on a cot 2 to 3 feet from the restroom. And they're locked in that facility, they're locked in that condition 16 hours a day. When everyone goes for pill line or whenever someone goes for food, there is no such thing as social distancing. It's a farce. The federal government and the state government has simply ignored the conditions that they allow to exist. Case in chief, I work with the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. My hero, Jeff Adachi, is the one who hired me. But for him, I wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that I do today. But at our office, the jail population hovered around 1,200 to 1,600. That now has been cut down to 750 as of today. It got to 699, which was amazing. We never thought that we'd see that. But now as things are slowly opening up, that population is continuing to go up to where it is today at 750. So we hope that everyone continues to advocate for those who are currently incarcerated. I know that my time is up, but I thank each and every one of you, and please continue to support those who are behind bars. You know, regardless of what you did, you don't deserve a death sentence on the government's watch.
You know, that's so true. I mean, people get sentenced for things that they plead to, they get convicted of, and it's not a life sentence, right? I mean, there's usually an out date or a light at the end of the tunnel, and the way they're being treated, it turns it into a death sentence. I think I read in The Guardian this morning that there's more than 25,000 people throughout the country who've tested positive for COVID-19. And one of the big problems is they're not really testing everybody in the prison system. So you really don't know what the actual numbers are. And you read about the guards at prisons and jails. They're not wearing masks. Certainly the inmates some of them might be given a mask, but don't you have to wash them every day, right? You heard about RCCC, where there's a lack of cleaning products, like soap, basic stuff. And so this is, I mean, to me, having been in the criminal justice system for close to 20 years, it's not surprising, but what can people do so that they can try to protect their clients? Yolanda, or someone, I mean, private attorneys, what can they do?
Well, I think,
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do that aren't being done, unfortunately. You know, there's many ideas you can think of. You can get bail reset. You can bring an OR motion. There's a lot of features in the California Penal Code that allows review. You know, Penal Code 1272.1 says that if your client can't afford bail, they immediately get reviewed 5 days later, right? So I wrote here for our office a form COVID-19 bail motion that our attorneys file and should file whenever their client is denied appropriate bail under the emergency mandatory bail schedule. If the defendant's not bailed out, you writ it, is my opinion. And you do it both as a writ of mandate and a writ of habeas corpus. And you take each and every case as high as it goes until you get the person released. That's for your pretrial detainee. For convicted detainees, you seek release. Penal Code 4004 provides that for good cause, the Superior Court judge can release defendants or people in jail. One of the few published cases on that penal code is Robert Downey Jr.'s case. It's Block v. Superior Court. It lays out 3 factors. We have a form motion for that too, for our attorneys to file, and they file it, and we try to get people released. And then you writ that too. And you keep pursuing the process. You just have to be relentless in doing so. If the person can still appeal, file the appeal, even if it was a plea. Get your certificate of probable cause, file your appeal, and then seek bail pending appeal under Penal Code 1272. You get bail pending appeal, you argue it should be 0 under the emergency mandatory bail schedule, and you might get the defendant out. There's a lot of tools. You got to be creative in using them and adopting the penal code for our times.
So we've got a question from Pamela Price. She asks, where do newly released folks go? How do we guarantee housing options for them? Who'd like to answer that one?
I can answer that one.
Thanks, Yolanda. Go ahead.
There's been a lot of press about resources for housing, and there actually are. But for someone who is coming out of jail, accessing that housing is very difficult. And you actually need someone to be an advocate for that person. I just have one example. I had this young man I was working with getting out of jail, and we suspected that he had been exposed to COVID while he was in Santa Rita jail. And I personally called the case manager and asked that he be placed into a protective housing situation for people who had been exposed and who had possible compromised health issues. And the jail turned me down flat. So it took an awful lot of hustling. I probably made easily 50 phone calls to find him emergency 2-week housing. And then that work had to be repeated again for the next 2 weeks. So housing is there. All those reports of lots of housing empty is true, but getting someone into that housing is not easy. And I don't totally know why, but it took someone, and I'm pretty persistent. I am not easily dissuaded to make a lot of calls in Alameda County to get one person into housing. And I think that that is a symptom of the fact that in Alameda, there is not a real commitment to the safety net from anyone. Even though there's a lot of money thrown at it, there's no commitment to really making those services available.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Can I just jump
go
in real
ahead.
quick?
Go ahead.
Can I answer that question for Sacramento County? Oh, go ahead.
Well, let's take Janos first.
Yeah.
Sure. So just something that we've been doing in New York on the advocacy side is taking advantage of the enormous hotel vacancies that we have going on. And I imagine there are certain cities and counties in California where there are a lot of hotels that are just sitting empty. Now, in New York, the sort of priority has been to get people in the shelter system who otherwise would be at great risk also to get into those rooms. And we've started making progress in that area. We've gotten almost 2,000 people out of the shelters into hotel rooms. And as you know, very often when people come home from jail or prison, they wind up in the shelter system. But so it's an extra step, unfortunately, in New York, but at least we're getting a good chunk of people, into much safer conditions. So I just want to throw that out there.
Okay, and John, you were going to talk about what's going on in Sacramento.
Yeah, thank you. This is just a great era for the changing times of public defense. Our office, our administration with Steve Garrett, Amanda Benson, and the leadership of Tiffany Sinnott especially, and Jenny Stonebrenner and Norm Dawson have really worked hard to roll out reentry programs. We have a number of different reentry programs, including a Project Help, which is help ran by a Miss Carrie Yama that helps rehome people and helps find housing for people. We've taken on social work interns to do case management activities. And we have an expungement clinic and various amounts of re-entry programs that we weren't utilizing before and we weren't really as activated in that space previously. And thanks to their work, we're now plugged in with the community groups and are directly providing those reentry services to our clients. And that's all the more important in the time of COVID. When we got 420 plus people out in a single day, Tiffany Synod mobilized a number of local community groups, including Decarcerated Sacramento, to meet them at the Rio Consumnes Correctional Center, meet them with resources for housing, resources for food, water, shelter, things like that, and immediately direct them into a reentry pipeline. We've been mindful of it as much as we can, and I just want to give a shout out to our team.
That's great. Thank you, John. Jaku, what about over in San Francisco?
Well, over in San Francisco, we're lucky to have Mano Raju, who's the public defender, and Chesa Bodine, who's the DA over there. So, and the sheriff and everyone is, really trying to work to get folks released. Obviously, we'd be happy if there was, 0 people in there, but that's not the reality, nor will it occur. And so the actions that our office is taking is filing motions in each one of those cases. And I'm not going to go over all that again, but John hit on a lot of those motions that are being filed there. With regard to the federal level, I'm not a federal public defender, but I'm quickly learning the federal system, not really by choice, but by circumstance. And with regard to my brother Lance, we initially filed a motion. He had to file a compassionate release motion. In order for that to occur, the person in custody has to file it, and you have to wait 30 days. There just wasn't that type of time, the way that things were moving quickly. So we hired an attorney there in Southern California, Alyssa Bell, a former federal public defender, and she was able to get the compassionate release motion filed. In the meantime, my brothers are fortunate. Most folks don't have a San Francisco public defender's office. Most folks don't have a Sacramento public defender's office. Most folks don't have some of the advocates who are on this phone call here. Most folks are in there alone, and they have no one to reach out to. And so those individuals, I reached out to the ACLU, I reached out to whoever I could reach out to, and thank God that they answered my calls, thanks to Kathleen Gurnarante with the ACLU Northern California. She put me in contact with Alyssa Bell. They put me in contact with Peter Biebering and others with the ACLU. And then the ACLU, the prison law office, and the law firm of Burt Morella took on my brother's cause. And that was great. And so I'll say that. The other thing, because I know that there may be individuals on this call who have loved ones, family members, community members, friends who are in custody. What I would suggest that they do is reach out to the CPDA, California Public Defender Association, reach out to CACJ, California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, reach out for the NACDL, National Attorneys for Criminal Defense, reach out to the ACLU, reach out to FAMM. Those are folks who can put you in contact with advocates just like that are on this call, who can help your loved ones, community members, family members get out.
Thank you, Jaku. I do have a question for you. Does it make it a little easier when you have a progressive DA? I'm just asking.
Life is always easier when you have a progressive DA, but in theory, I won't go down that road today. But what I will say is that Chesa Bodine has a father who's currently incarcerated. He understands what it is to have a loved one behind bars. He understands what it is to have a loved one behind bars who did not kill anyone, who made mistakes. So we are lucky in San Francisco to have him as the DA. I'll leave it alone.
Well, thank you. Janos, you're running for DA, right?
That's right.
And why are you doing it?
Just big picture, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
Well, like many of the folks that have been talking about on this panel, I don't believe that jail or prison is the answer to society's problems. And I've been working to reform the criminal justice system from as many angles as I can in my career. As a civil rights attorney, as somebody trying to change laws and close jails, as somebody who's inside a government trying to reform from the inside. And the reality is that district attorneys have an enormous amount of discretion in the day-to-day functioning of the court system. I think Chase is a great example of somebody who is really implementing reforms that would have been considered very controversial even a few years ago, even in places like San Francisco and New York. And people like him are really doing a great job in shifting definitions around how we keep the public safe. So I'm really excited to bring that perspective to Manhattan. We have a somewhat questionable district attorney, Cy Vance, who's made a lot of bad headlines over the last number of years. But it's not even really about him. This is about elevating the community voice, the same community groups that have fought for police reform and for decarceration and for bail reform and for closing Rikers. It's bringing that perspective to the district attorney's office, to actually treating that office like what it is. It's a democratically elected position. It should reflect the views and the positions of the community, not be some kind of generic law and order position the way it is in so many counties across the United States.
Thank you. Yolanda, in your research for your lawsuit, have you found that the jail staff is practicing social distancing or wearing masks or doing anything so that they're not bringing COVID-19 into the facilities?
The reports that I'm getting from prisoners in Santa Rita Jail is that a number of the prison deputies are not practicing good habits. You know, even at the best of time, when they masked up and used gloves, they didn't change them going from housing unit to housing unit. So if they're wearing gloves and they handle or they search or they do whatever, then they just bring those gloves and those hands to the next housing unit. And there's been quite a bit of spread in Santa Rita, although Santa Rita has been lucky. You know, I don't know enough science to say whether they've been lucky or just that they've under-tested in terms of the people who've have tested positive for COVID. And I think that it is a problem. I think it's a problem that's reflected in the fact that there are people in the United States who are advocating the point of view that this is no big deal. And I think that that is a concern because the deputies are not the vulnerable population.
What about in Sacramento, John? John, did you hear me?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, how about in Sacramento? Are the deputies over at the jails practicing COVID-safe social distancing, masking, gloves, the whole bit?
You know, it's a mix. According to the Sheriff Department's counsel, they're doing all of the CDC guidelines. But when you witness deputies themselves, they're individuals and they have their own personalities and they have their own opinions on whether or not coronavirus is real and whatnot. So you do see a mix. You see deputies refusing to wear masks. You see deputies like Yolanda saying not changing gloves. I agree with Yolanda. I don't think gloves are changed in between the situations and things like that. It seems to be a personal choice for the deputies. But just to point out, as I argued in all of our motions, I think what's gotten us some traction, because we're not as fortunate as San Francisco insofar as, you know, being a little bit more progressive, is it is also about the deputies, right? Because it's about that deputy who has a vulnerable wife or takes care of his mom at home and she's elderly, even if they don't realize it. COVID-19 is a public health crisis for the community at large and incarcerated people. And it's rare in the history of the state that an individual's personal liberty can affect the population at large. So we've been arguing it's about everybody and we're all in it together.
Right on. I mean, it really is about we're all in it together. I think some people who I guess haven't experienced or known people who are in custody, like, you know, I was a public defender, John, you're a public defender. It seems like all of you have experience representing people who've been in custody. There's no empathy by people who haven't been there, have talked to these people, have gotten to know them. And so for them, it's like a case number to them. A person's like a case number. So it's really unfortunate. Be great if there were more progressive DAs in all these different areas. We're kind of coming down to the end. A short final thought from all of you. Janos first.
Sure. Well, my hope is that we can get as many people out of jail and prison as possible during COVID-19. and that moving forward, that reduced footprint becomes the standard. If we're trying to get elderly people out of prison, maybe that will shed some light onto the argument that elderly people generally shouldn't be in prison, and so on. So I hope that whatever advocacy work and legal work everyone does during this period is also translated into a newer, smaller criminal justice system moving forward.
Thank you, Janos. Jaku?
Yeah, well, and part of this was like why we need criminal justice reform. This is exactly why, because of mass incarceration. And this is what happens when you put so many folks in cages. Additionally, as John had mentioned, so many folks look at, folks who I represent and others as a case number. And it's when you put a name on that face or a photo on that face and you humanize that face like Sam Levin did today with regard to my family and other families, it changes the narrative and folks start to look at those individuals that we put in cages differently, to realize that those are our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our community members. And so, once we start doing that with the bail motions like John is talking about in Sacramento, the work that Yolanda is doing, the work that if Janos becomes the DA, that is what we need. And so I'm so, happy that you all had me on this panel and a blessing to be with all of you, and stay well, be healthy.
Thank you, Jaku. Yolanda?
Well, I think that there are many arguments as to why jails are the wrong solution. And what I try to bring out is the fact that right now, the sheriff says it costs $200,000 a year to incarcerate a person for a year. And he just asked and was granted a budget increase of $106 or $116 million. So almost $500 million, and his numbers went down by 700. So if people are not able to pay taxes, if we are having a severe economic crisis, if childcare is an issue, if people don't have health care, if we have all of these social needs, it goes down to, you could take this $200,000 and you can do a whole lot more to benefit a lot more people for a year, and feed them terrible food and give them chronic illnesses and mental health issues, because that's what jail produces. And it's not worth the money.
Thank you, Yolanda. Yeah, that's a lot to take in. It's true though, right? John?
Yeah, I guess my only closing remarks would be that, times of crisis really show people what they're made of. They show institutions what they're made of. COVID-19 is clearly putting a spotlight on the inhumane jail conditions that exist in California. But we're also seeing, just in our responses and our approach to criminal justice, just testing the principles of our Constitution. And it is really up to advocates and activist groups and organizers to really stick together and keep whatever momentum we get out of COVID-19 into criminal justice reform. Maybe the emergency mandatory bail schedule becomes permanent. Who knows? Maybe it works really well. And so we just have to continue doing the work.
Thank you, John. And certainly this crisis has changed a lot of things in the court system. We're seeing Zoom calls or Zoom appearances now. The US Supreme Court is actually doing telephonic hearings. So sometimes it's the moment of crisis that can really make a change. And maybe this is the one for decarceration. Anyways, I want to thank the panelists. It's kind of hard to say, let's give them a hand, but I guess I could ask that. I mean, I don't hear anything, but I want to thank David Greenwald, who is the founder of the Vanguard and Court Watch. I certainly want to thank Danny Silva, who behind the scenes has been making sure that the videos work properly, the right person's on the screen. And believe it or else, she's actually going to law school and leaving the Vanguard, darn her. But I just want to give a shout out to her because she's done an amazing job with the Vanguard. And if you like this program, or you read the Vanguard online, the Court Watch articles, get a subscription, donate, and help us get to LA. And I certainly want to thank you all for attending. And this is Josh Kaizuka signing out. And take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and kick ass in the courtroom and defend your clients.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.